Happy Friday. Oh, look at that puppy showing his butt off. Oh, wagging his tail off. Wanting a treat. Getting a treat. How is everybody? And by everybody right now I mean Farm Mouse. How is Farm Mouse? I don't think anybody else is here yet. Farm Mouse kinda sore. Farm Mouse had physio today. I'm kinda sleepy. Puppy's having some of his dinner. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Yeah, you. I'm having an Omega egg ball biscuit. Does it look like a little ball of chalk? Because it tastes a little like a ball of chalk. Oh. Yeah, kind of sweet. Sort of dissolvey. About. As I choke on it. Ball of chalk. Good evening, Sharkies. I'm not literally eating chalk. I'm having an Omega egg ball biscuit. Ingredients: potato starch, sugar, egg, glucose, corn syrup, wheat flour, skim milk powder, cornstarch, glutinous rice. They look like tiny little buns. Tiny little lightly browned buns. But they taste a little bit like sort of dissolvey sweet chalk. How are the Sharkies on this fine Friday evening? Hi, Ben. Hello. Finishing off some French toast and enjoying a bit of rest time. When I was younger, I didn't like French toast very much. I think the texture I found weird. I don't mind it so much now. But, yeah, there was a time. There was a time where I thought French toast, I think the texture was sort of strange. Rimo says, more breakfast for dinner. Yeah, last week you were having pancakes, and then the next day, Farmhouse did, in fact, make chocolate chip pancakes. But not for dinner. For breakfast. We haven't had dinner yet ourselves. Gotta figure that out. Mr. Sharky wasn't a fan of eggs as a young lad. I liked eggs. Um, like my grandmother would, we had, an egg cup and you do the like soft boiled egg and then toast that you dip into it. I'd enjoy that, or egg in a hole. I liked that, but something about French bread, like the being coated in egg, I think it just like it was a combination of textures maybe that I found weird. Not to mention that like a lot of people like to have like maple syrup on it, and to me that's a weird. It doesn't seem like something that should be that sweet. Like I think maybe I would enjoy it more as a not sweet food. Maybe. It is not something that I have very often because I still don't like. It's not my favorite. Still, it's like yeah, I can eat it now. It's okay, but it's not something where I'm like, ooh, I want that. I don't seek it out exactly. There is a new Asian food market that has opened up relatively near to us, closer than any of the like T&Ts and things. So we stopped in there today to check out the snacks and things like that. Got a few because we're gonna visit some friends on the weekend, so we got a few snacks to share with them. And then I picked up those egg ball things and this package of peanuts, which was it's called peanut. What is it? It says Jiu Gui Hua Sheng. I thought maybe it would be interesting. Um, but then it's like full of these like little individual super vacuum sealed packages of peanuts, and they're basically like slightly sweetened peanuts. Like they've got maybe a little sugar in there. The ingredient list is pretty limited, and it's basically they're basically just nuts. But and now I'm kind of like, I could have just got probably could have bought peanuts for a lot cheaper and would have been essentially the same. Excuse me. And also, it wouldn't have been imported from uh, China, which, yeah, now I'm kind of like, oh, I really don't need imported Chinese peanuts. It's a lot of travel for some peanuts. So I don't think I'll be buying those again. But we got some tasty peach drinks, and I bought myself some milk tea because I do enjoy a nice cold milk tea. And we bought a couple of interesting sort of. They look like those little plastic jugs, the like little milk jugs that you would get like a little thing of chocolate milk in or something like that. Oh, dealing with a bit of a mishap. Everything okay? I was just talking about snacks, so that is all right. Nothing important to miss out on. Itchy, itchy nose. Look at that pup. Did somebody spill a drink? Uh, well, that's important to something. I don't know what I'm talking about. It's like car honking outside. Yeah, we bought some weird little milk jug style things that are full of some kind of like. One of them was like an almond dessert, and one was a black sesame dessert. Not really entirely certain what to expect from them because they're like pretty liquidy, so I don't know if it's like a drink or it was called like dessert, but I don't know if it's like it seemed too thin to be a pudding to me, so it's I don't know. But it sounded tasty, so we picked up a couple of those to share with some friends. And yeah, a couple of other odd things to try out, like the bean soup from TNT. Maybe. I'm. I mean, Shannon is a Farmos is a big fan of red bean soup. I also enjoy red bean soup. It is tasty, sweet. Um, on years where there is not a worldwide pandemic, my kung fu school goes to an annual sort of Vancouver area um, banquet, kung fu banquet. And all these like different kung fu schools go to this Chinese restaurant called Flota, I think it is, and there's a big banquet. Um, Lots of interesting foods get served, and each school does a little demo of their kung fu and shows off. And at the end, like the dessert course, there's always red bean soup, which is quite tasty. Used to get that soup often with TNT meals. I've never lived close enough to a TNT to like get meals from there. I go there to like pick up ingredients for hot pot and things like that. But maybe now we'll be able to go to this new place, which is called like Sun Given Foods or something. Yeah. So, look at that cover. What's going on there, huh? Not sure that illustration of Polgara on the cover there exactly matches my mental image of her. Something about it's not quite right. I think the outfit, first of all, is wrong. She's never described as wearing red. And it's also just kind of a sack-like dress, isn't it? Oh, well, I don't think that she is supposed to be on scale with them. These are, I think, two different scenes. Maybe. I didn't really think of that. Dress looks like 1970s nightgowns. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't, it's too just straight. There's no shape to it. So realistically, I think my main issue with that is just the outfit. So, we are going on to chapter 6, in which something might happen, who knows. But in chapter 5, they had a run-in with some Mimbrate Knights, where they almost got held up and interrogated. But then the Tolnedran Legionnaires showed up, and because they were on the highway, the Tolnedran Legionnaires were like, hey, cut that out. Let them go. They've got legitimate business. And so they got out of there. And they stayed one night at a Tolnedran hostel, maybe even more than one night. But then Leldoran's horse came up lame, and so they took some time taking care of that, and then were forced to spend the night in a surf village in a little inn there with a hole in the roof where there was fire damage, and a funeral procession in the streets, and just all kinds of awfulness. And Leldoran actually seemed to have a little bit of an awakening to that. There was I hadn't realized it was so bad, Leldoran replied in a subdued voice. He looked around as if seeing certain things for the first time. A kind of sick horror began to show itself in his transparent face. And then, yeah. Garion went on a little walk, and as Farmos says, some kind of unimportant man on a horse, nothing to worry about. Having no shadow is normal. Just gonna immediately forget about that. Yep. And a young boy playing a heartbreaking melody on a flute. So yeah, that's basically the majority of what happened in chapter 5. So what do you say we get right into chapter 6, huh? Everybody ready? Ready to do some book reading? Reading the book? I'm on page 63. And how long is this book? 322 pages, so a bit longer than Pawn of Prophecy. Yeah, books! Flip the pool! That's getting a new season soon. Also, that bit, the way that the guy, that probably not Asherak, was that bit of description was interesting because it was like Garion sees them. There's something ominous about the figure, something vaguely familiar. Um, couldn't figure out the name. And then there was this bit about he would not say anything to Aunt Pole or the others about the figure at the edge of the woods because there was nothing to say. As soon as he turned his back, he would forget. That the way that that's phrased, it sounds like somebody is like that sounds like this is what you're going to do. You're going to forget about this. Like those ideas being planted in his head, kind of. That's how that reads to me. It's not the way that he normally presents information. It's oddly future tense, yeah. Yeah, it sounds like somebody telling him that, only without the quotation marks. All right, I'm going to read chapter 6. Despite the promise of the brief sunset, the next day dawned cold and murky, with a chill drizzle that wreathed down among the trees and made the entire forest sodden and gloomy. They left the inn early and soon entered a part of the wood that seemed more darkly foreboding than even the ominous stretches through which they had previously passed. Oh boy. The trees here were enormous, and many vast, gnarled oaks lifted their bare limbs among the dark firs and spruces. The forest floor was covered with a kind of gray moss that looked diseased and unwholesome. Leldorin had spoken little that morning, and Garion assumed that his friend was still struggling with the problem of Natchak's scheme. The young Asturian rode along, wrapped in his heavy green cloak, his reddish gold hair damp and dispirited looking in the steady drizzle. Garion pulled in beside his friend, and they rode silently for a while. "What's troubling you, Leldorin?" he asked finally. I think that all my life I've been blind, Garion," Leldorin replied. "Oh? In what way?" Garion said it carefully, hoping that his friend had finally decided to tell Mr. Wolf everything. "I only saw Mimbre's oppression of Asturia. I never saw our own oppression of our own people." "I've been trying to tell you that," Garion pointed out. What made you see it finally? That village where we stayed last night, Leldoran explained. I've never seen so poor and mean a place, or people crushed into such hopeless misery. How can they bear it? Do they have any choice? My father at least looks after the people on his land, the young man asserted defensively. No one goes hungry or without shelter, but those people are treated worse than animals. I've always been proud of my station, but now it makes me ashamed. Tears actually stood in his eyes. Garion was not sure how to deal with his friend's sudden awakening. On the one hand, he was glad that Leldoran had finally seen what had always been obvious, but on the other, he was more than a little afraid of what this newfound perception might cause his mercurial companion to leap into. I'll renounce my rank, Leldoran declared suddenly, as if he had been listening to Garion's thoughts. And when I return from this quest, I'll go among the serfs and share their lives, their sorrows. What good will that do? How would your suffering in any way make theirs less? Leldoran looked up sharply, a half-dozen emotions chasing each other across his open face. Finally, he smiled, but there was a determination in his blue eyes. You're right, of course, he said. You always are. It's amazing how you can always see directly to the heart of a problem, Garion. Just what have you got in mind? Garion asked, a little apprehensively. I'll lead them in revolt. I'll sweep across Erendia with an army of serfs at my back. His voice rang as his imagination fired with the idea. Garion groaned. Why is that always your answer to everything, Leldoran? He demanded. In the first place, the serfs don't have any weapons, and they don't know how to fight. No matter how hard you talk, you'd never get them to follow you. In the second place, if they did, every nobleman in Erendia would join ranks against you. They'd butcher your army, and afterward, things would be 10 times worse. In the third place, you'd just be starting another civil war, and that's exactly what the Murgos want. Leldoran blinked several times as Garion's words sank in. His face gradually grew mournful again. I hadn't thought of that, he confessed. I didn't think you had. You're going to keep making these mistakes as long as you keep carrying your brain in the same scabbard with your sword, Leldoran. Oh, snap. Garion has had enough of Leldoran's crap. Oh boy. Farmos saying, a lot of very well-meaning people need a Garion to help them not do stupidly well-meaning things. But I want to do something, and it needs to be dramatic. Sharky say, you mean revolution isn't the answer to everything? Carrying your brain in the same scabbard with your sword. Leldoran flushed at that, and then he laughed ruefully. That's a pointed way of putting it, Garion, he said reproachfully. I'm sorry, Garion apologized quickly. Maybe I should have said it another way. No, Leldorin told him. I'm an errand. I tend to miss things if they aren't said directly. It's not that you're stupid, Leldorin, Garion protested. That's a mistake everyone makes. Errands aren't stupid. They're just impulsive. All this was more than just impulsiveness, Leldorin insisted sadly, gesturing out at the damp moss lying under the trees. This what? Garion asked, looking around. This is the last stretch of forest before we come out on the plains of central Erendia, Leldorin explained. It's the natural boundary between Mimbre and Asturia. The woods look the same as all the rest, Garion observed, looking around. Not really, Leldorin said somberly. This was the favorite ground for ambush. The floor of this forest is carpeted with old bones. Look there, he pointed. At first it seemed to Garion that what his friend indicated was merely a pair of twisted sticks protruding from the moss with the twigs at their ends entangled in a scrubby bush. Then, with revulsion, he realized that they were the greenish bones of a human arm. The fingers clutched at the bush in a last convulsive agony. Outraged, he demanded, "Why didn't they bury him?" "It would take 1,000 men, 1,000 years, to gather all the bones that lie here and commit them to earth," Leldorin intoned morbidly. "Whole generations of Erendia rest here. Mimbrate, Wasite, Asturian. All lie where they fell, and the moss blankets their endless slumber." Garion shuddered and pulled his eyes away from the mute appeal of that lone arm rising from the sea of moss on the floor of the forest. The curious lumps and hummocks of that moss suggested the horror which lay moldering beneath. As he raised his eyes, he realized that the uneven surface extended as far as he could see. "How long until we reach the plain?" he asked in a hushed voice. 2 days, probably." 2 days? And it's all like this?" Leldorin nodded. "Why?" Garion's tone was harsher, more accusing than he'd intended. "At first, for pride and honor," Leldorin replied. "Later, for grief and revenge. Finally, it was because we didn't know how to stop. As you said before, sometimes we Erens aren't very bright." "But always brave," Garion answered quickly. "Oh yes," Leldorin admitted. "Always brave. It's our national curse." "Belgarath," Hetar said quietly from behind them. "The horses smell something." Mr. Wolf roused himself from the doze in which he usually rode. "What?" "The horses," Hetar repeated. Something out there's frightening them." Wolf's eyes narrowed and then grew strangely blank. After a moment, he drew in a sharp breath with a muttered curse. "Algroths," he swore. "What's an Algroth?" Dernick asked. "A non-human, somewhat distantly related to trolls." "I saw a troll once," Barak said.
A big ugly thing with claws and fangs.
Will they attack us? Dernick asked.
Almost certainly. Wolf's voice was tense. Hatar, you're going to have to keep the horses under control. We don't dare get separated.
Where did they come from? Leldorin asked. There aren't any monsters in this forest.
They come down out of the They come down out of the mountains of Ulgo sometimes when they get hungry, Wolf answered. They don't leave survivors to report their presence.
You'd better do something, Father, Aunt Pole said. They're all around us. Leldorin looked quickly around as if getting his bearings. We're not far from Elgin's Tor, he offered. We might be able to hold them off if we get there.
Elgin's Tor,
Barak said. He had already drawn his heavy sword. It's a high hillock covered with boulders, Leldorin explained. It's almost like a fort. Elgin held it for a month against a Mimbrate army. Sounds promising, Silk said. It would get us out of the trees at least. He looked nervously around at the forest looming about them in the drizzling rain.
Let's try for it, Wolf decided. They haven't worked themselves up to the point of attacking yet, and the rain's confusing their sense of smell.
A strange barking sound came from back in the forest. Is that them? Garion asked, his voice sounding shrill in his own ears.
They're calling to each other, Wolf told him. Some of them have seen us. Let's pick up the pace a bit, but don't start running until we see the Tor.
They nudged their nervous horses into a trot and moved steadily along the muddy road as it began to climb toward the top of a low ridge. Half a league, Leldorin said tensely. Half a league and we should see the Tor. The horses were difficult to hold in, and their eyes rolled wildly at the surrounding woods. Garion felt his heart pounding, and his mouth was suddenly dry. It started to rain a bit harder. He caught a movement out of the corner of his eye and looked quickly. A man-like figure was loping along parallel to the road, about 100 paces back in the forest. It ran, half-crouched, its hands touching the ground. It seemed to be a loathsome gray color. Over there! Garion cried.
I saw him,
Barak growled.
Not quite as big as a troll.
Silk grimaced. Big enough.
If they attack, be careful of their claws, Wolf warned. They're venomous.
That's exciting, Silk said. There's the Tor, Aunt Pole announced, calmly.
Let's run,
Wolf barked. The frightened horses, suddenly released, leaped forward and fled up the road, their hooves churning. An enraged howl came from the woods behind them, and the barking sound grew louder all around them. We're going to make it, Dernick shouted in encouragement. But suddenly, a half-dozen snarling Algroths were in the road in front of them, their arms spread wide and their mouths gaping hideously. They were huge, with ape-like arms and claws instead of fingers. Their faces were goatish, surmounted by short, sharp-pointed horns, and they had long yellow fangs. Their gray skin was scaly, reptilian. The horses screamed and reared, trying to bolt. Garion clung to his saddle with one hand and fought the reins with the other. Barak beat at his horse's rump with the flat of his sword and kicked savagely at the animal's flanks until the horse, finally more afraid of him than the Algroths, charged. With two great sweeps, one to either side, Barak killed two of the beasts as he plunged through. A third, claws outstretched, tried to leap on his back, but stiffened and collapsed face down in the mud with one of Leldoran's arrows between its shoulders. Barak wheeled his horse and chopped at the 3 remaining creatures.
"Let's go!"
he bellowed. Garion heard Leldoran gasp and turned quickly. With sick horror, he saw that a lone Algroth had crept out of the woods beside the road and was clawing at his friend, trying to hook him out of the saddle. Weakly, Leldoran beat at the goat face with his bow. Garion desperately drew his sword, but Hatar, coming from behind, was already there. His curved saber ran through the beast's body, and the Algroth shrieked and fell writhing to the ground beneath the pounding hoofs of the pack animals. The horses, running now in sheer panic, scrambled toward the slope of the boulder-strewn tor. Garion glanced back over his shoulder and saw Leldoran swaying dangerously in his saddle, his hand pressed to his bleeding side. Garion pulled in savagely on his reins and turned his horse. "Save yourself, Garion!" Leldoran shouted, his face deadly pale. "No!" Garion sheathed his sword, pulled in beside his friend, and took his arm, steadying him in the saddle. Together they galloped toward the tor, with Garion straining to hold the injured young man. The tor was a great jumble of earth and stone, thrusting up above the tallest trees around it. Their horses scrambled and clattered up the side among the wet boulders. When they reached the small, flat area at the top of the tor, where the pack animals huddled together, trembling in the rain, Garion slid out of his saddle in time to catch Leldoran, who toppled slowly to one side. "Over here," Aunt Pole called sharply. She was pulling her small bundle of herbs and bandages out of one of the packs. "Dernick, I'll need a fire, at once." Dernick looked around helplessly at the few scraps of wood lying in the rain at the top of the tor. "I'll try," he said doubtfully. Leldoran's breathing was shallow and very fast. His face was still a deadly white, and his legs would not hold him. Garion held him up, a sick fear in the pit of his stomach. Hatar took the wounded man's other arm, and between them they half-carried him to where Aunt Pole knelt, opening her bundle. "I have to get the poison out immediately," she told him. "Garion, give me your knife." Garion drew his dagger and handed it to her. Swiftly she ripped open Leldoran's brown tunic along his side, revealing the savage wounds the Algroth's claws had made. "This will hurt," she said. "Hold him." Garion and Hatar took hold of Leldoran's arms and legs, holding him down. Aunt Pole took a deep breath, and then deftly sliced open each of the puffy wounds. Blood spurted, and Leldoran screamed once. Then he fainted.
"Hatar!"
Barak shouted from atop a boulder near the edge of the slope.
"We need you!"
"Go," Aunt Pole told the hawk-faced Algar. "We can handle this now. Garion, you stay here." She was crushing some dried leaves and sprinkling the fragments into the bleeding wounds. "The fire, Dernick," she ordered. "It won't start, Mistress Pole," Dernick replied helplessly. "It's too wet." She looked quickly at the pile of sodden wood the smith had gathered. Her eyes narrowed, and she made a quick gesture. Garion's ears rang strangely, and there was a sudden hissing. What was the sound? A cloud of steam burst from the wood, and then crackling flames curled up from the sticks. Dernick jumped back, startled. "Hank." "The small pot, Garion," Aunt Pole instructed. "And water. Quickly." She pulled off her blue cloak and covered Leldoran with it. Silk, Barak, and Hatar stood at the edge of the slope, heaving large rocks over the edge. Garion could hear the clatter and clash of the rocks striking the boulders below, and the barking of the Algroths, punctuated by an occasional howl of pain. He cradled his friend's head in his lap, terribly afraid. "Is he going to be all right?" he appealed to Aunt Pole. "It's too early to tell," she answered. "Don't bother me with questions just now."
"They're running!" Barak shouted. "They're still hungry," Wolf replied grimly. "They'll be back."
From far off, in the forest, there came the sound of a brassy horn. "What's that?" Silk asked, still puffing from the effort of heaving the heavy stones over the edge.
"Someone I've been expecting,"
Wolf answered, with a strange smile. He raised his hands to his lips and whistled shrilly. "I can manage now, Garion," Aunt Pole said, mashing a thick paste into a steaming pad of wet linen bandage. "You and Dernick go help the others." Reluctantly, Garion lowered Laldoran's head to the wet turf and ran over to where Wolf stood. The slope below was littered with dead and dying Algroths, crushed by the rocks Barak and the others had hurled down on them.
"They're going to try again,"
Barak said, hefting another rock.
"Can they get at us from behind?"
Silk shook his head. "No, I checked. The back of the hill's a sheer face." The Algroths came out of the woods below, barking and snarling as they loped forward with their half-crouched gait. The first of them had already crossed the road when the horn blew again, very close this time. And then a huge horse, bearing a man in full armor, burst out of the trees and thundered down upon the attacking creatures. The armored man crouched over his lance and plunged directly into the midst of the startled Algroths. The great horse screamed as he charged, and his iron-shod hoofs churned up big clots of mud. The lance crashed through the chest of one of the largest Algroths and splintered from the force of the blow. The splintered end took another full in the face. The knight discarded the shattered lance and drew his broadsword with a single sweep of his arm. With wide swings to the right and left, he chopped his way through the pack, his warhorse trampling the living and the dead alike into the mud of the road. At the end of his charge, he whirled and plunged back again, once more opening a path with his sword. The Algroths turned and fled howling into the woods.
"Mandaralin!" Wolf shouted. "Up here!"
The armored knight raised his blood-spattered visor and looked up the hill. "Permit me to disperse this rabble first, my ancient friend," he answered gaily, clanged down his visor, and plunged into the rainy woods after the Algroths.
"Hatar!"
Barak shouted, already moving. Hatar nodded tersely, and the two of them ran to their horses. They swung into their saddles and plunged down the wet slope to the aid of the stranger. "Your friend shows a remarkable lack of good sense," Silk observed to Mr. Wolf, wiping the rain from his face. "Those things will turn on him any second now."
"It probably hasn't occurred to him that he's in any danger," Wolf replied. "He's a membrate, and they tend to think they're invincible."
The fight in the woods seemed to last for a long time. There were shouts and ringing blows and shrieks of terror from the Algroths. Then Hatar, Barak, and the strange knight rode out of the trees and trotted up the tor. At the top, The armored man clanged down from his horse. "Well met, my old friend," he boomed to Mr. Wolf. "Thy friends below were most frolicsome." His armor gleamed wetly in the rain.
"I'm glad we found something to entertain you,"
Wolf said dryly. "I can still hear them," Dernick reported. "I think they're still running." "Their cowardice hath deprived us of an amusing afternoon," the knight observed, regretfully sheathing his sword and removing his helmet. "We must all make sacrifices," Silk drawled. The knight sighed. "All too true. Thou art a man of philosophy, I see." He shook the water out of the white plume on his helmet.
"Forgive me," Mr. Wolf said. "This is Mandaralin, Baron of Vomandor. He'll be going with us. Mandaralin, this is Prince Keldar of Drasnia, and Barak, Earl of Trelheim, and cousin to King Anheg of Cherek. Over there is Hetar, son of Chohag, chief of the clan chiefs of Algaria. The practical one is Goodman Dernick of Sendaria, and this boy is Garion, my grandson, several times removed."
Mandaralin bowed deeply to each of them.
"I greet you, comrades all," he declaimed in his booming voice. "Our adventure hath seen a fortuitous beginning. And pray tell, who is this lady whose beauty doth bedazzle mine eye?"
"A pretty speech, Sir Knight," Aunt Pole replied with a rich laugh, her hand going almost unconsciously to her damp hair. "I'm going to like this one, Father."
"The legendary Lady Polgara?" Mandaralin asked. "My life hath now seen its crown."
His courtly bow was somewhat marred by the creaking of his armor.
"Our injured friend is Leldorin, son of the Baron of Wildantor," Wolf continued. "You may have heard of him."
Mandaralin's face darkened slightly.
"Indeed. Rumor, which sometimes doth run before us like a barking dog, hath suggested that Leldorin of Wildantor hath raised on occasion foul rebellion against the crown." "That's of no matter now," Wolf stressed. "The business which has brought us together is much more serious than all that. You'll have to put it aside."
"It shall be as you say, noble Belgarath," Mandaralin declared immediately, though his eyes still lingered on the unconscious Leldorin. "Grandfather!" Garion called, pointing at a mounted figure that had suddenly appeared on the side of the stony hilltop. The figure was robed in black and sat a black horse. Bold. He pushed back his hood to reveal a polished steel mask cast in the form of a face that was at once beautiful and strangely repelling. A voice, deep in Garion's mind, told him that there was something important about the strange rider, something he should remember, but whatever it was eluded him. "Abandon this quest, Belgarath." The voice was hollow behind the mask.
"You know me better than that, Chamdar,"
Mr. Wolf said calmly, quite obviously recognizing the rider.
"Was this childishness with the Algroths your idea?"
"And you should know me better than that," the figure retorted derisively. "When I come against you, you can expect things to be a bit more serious. For now, there are enough underlings about to delay you. That's all we really need. Once Zedar has carried Thrag Yaska to my master, you can try your power against the might and will of Torak. if you'd like.
Are you running errands for Zedar, then?
Wolf asked. I run no man's errands, the figure replied with heavy contempt. The rider seemed solid, as real as any of them standing on the hilltop, but Geryon could see the filmy drizzle striking the rocks directly beneath horse and man. Whatever the figure was, the rain was falling right through it.
Why are you here, then, Shamdar?
Wolf demanded. Let's call it curiosity, Belgarath. I wanted to see for myself how you'd managed to translate the prophecy into everyday terms. The figure looked around at the others on the hilltop. Clever, it said with a certain grudging admiration. Where did you find them all?
I didn't have to find them, Shamdar, Wolf answered. They've been there all along. If any part of the prophecy is valid, then it all has to be valid, doesn't it? There's no contrivance involved at all. Each one has come down to me through more generations than you can imagine.
The figure seemed to hiss with a sharp intake of its breath. It isn't complete yet, old man.
It will be, Shamdar,
Wolf replied confidently.
I've already seen to that.
Which is the one who will live twice? The figure asked suddenly. Wolf smiled coldly, but did not answer. Hail, my queen, the figure said mockingly then to Aunt Pole. Grolim courtesy always leaves me quite cold, she returned with a frosty look. I'm not your queen, Shamdar. You will be, Polgara. My master said that you are to become his wife when he comes into his kingdom. You'll be queen of all the world. That puts you at a bit of a disadvantage, doesn't it, Shamdar? If I'm to become your queen, you can't really cross me, can you? I can work around you, Polgara, and once you've become the bride of Torak, his will becomes your will. I'm sure you won't hold any old grudges at that point.
I think we've had about enough of this, Shamdar, Mr. Wolf said. Your conversation's beginning to bore me. You can have your shadow back now.
He waved his hand negligently, as if brushing away a troublesome fly.
Go,
he commanded. Once again, Geryon felt that strange surge and that hollow roaring in his mind. The horseman vanished. You didn't destroy him, did you? Silk gasped in a shocked voice.
No, Mr. Wolf told him. It was all just an illusion. It's a childish trick the Grolims find impressive. A shadow can be projected over quite some distance if you want to take the trouble. All I did was send his shadow back to him.
He grinned suddenly with a sly twist to his lips.
Of course, I selected a somewhat indirect route. It may take a few days to make the trip. It won't actually hurt him, but it's going to make him a bit uncomfortable and extremely conspicuous.
A most unseemly spectre, Mandaralin observed. Who was this rude shade? It was Chamdar, Aunt Pole said, returning her attention to the injured Leldoran, one of the chief priests of the Grolims. Father and I have met him before.
I think we'd better get off this hilltop.
There's a typo in my copy. It says, I think we'd get off this hilltop. Getter. Wolf stated.
How soon will Leldoran be able to ride?
A week at least, Aunt Pole replied. If then.
That's out of the question. We can't stay here.
He can't Ride, she told him firmly. Couldn't we make a litter of some sort? Dernick suggested. I'm sure I can make something we can sling between two horses, so we can move him without hurting him.
Well, Paul?
Wolf asked. I suppose it will be all right, she said, a little dubiously.
Let's do it then. We're much too exposed up here, and we've got to move on.
Dernick nodded and went to the packs for rope to use in building the litter. Oh, you've also got Getter. Sharky say, hollow roaring, maybe not quite a hank. Yeah, I guess it's more of like a whoosh, maybe? Like a kind of noise. So that's the end of chapter 6. It's not quite 8 o'clock yet. So some excitement there. This is the very first appearance, I think, of monsters, of non-humans in these books. About a quarter of a way into the second book. Yeah, other than that, I think everything else has either been person or animal, but this is the first monster. And we've acquired a new traveling companion, Mandoralin, Baron of Vomandor. Which, yeah, a certain resemblance to another popular character in media right now. Definitely some similarities. Pharmos had trouble getting his name right. I don't think I've ever had trouble with Mandoralin. So let's see. Chapter 7. Goes from page basically 76 to page 90. So it's a little bit of a longer one, so maybe we shouldn't get into it. I mean, we are a little bit early at this point, not quite 8 o'clock, but I don't know. Call him Mando for short. That would, I think, confuse me even more. Like I said, I don't have any trouble with Mandoralin. Pharmos is on reading break. Pharma says they've mentioned giants before, but this is our first. Yeah, they've mentioned a few different things, and have they mentioned monsters in general? I think they have. When talking about Ulgo, maybe. I feel like there was at least one mention of monsters previously, but yeah. They come down out of the mountains of Ulgo. And we may or may not learn more about that later. I like that Mr. Wolf sends his shadow back and, is a little mischievous about it. It's going to take a few days for it to get back to him. Yeah, things indeed happen. Yeah, you can maybe see now why I thought we probably wouldn't want to stop in the middle of this chapter. Because I looked at like halfway through the chapter and it was like they were in the middle of the fight with the Algroths and I was like, oh no, we're not going to want to stop mid-monster battle. So, yeah. That said, maybe we could read like a part of the next chapter if we wanted to. But I don't know. What do y'all want to do? Anybody want a peanut? It is Friday. All right, let's read a little more then. I like to read. And there's been some excitement, and we gotta find out what's gonna happen with Leldoran. He's been venomed. Puppy also wants to know what happened to Leldoran. Wag, 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 wag. Oh, big stretch. Oh. Big stretch. Wag, wag, wag. Puppy did. Oh, I did say, anybody want a peanut? He needs a pet. He won't come over for pets. He'd come over for treats, but not pets. All right, let's get into chapter 7. And we'll see how long it takes. Maybe we'll finish it, or maybe we'll stop partway through. Sir Mandoralin, Baron of Vomandor, was a man of slightly more than medium height. You know, I've always pictured him as being massive, but I guess it's all the armor. He's only slightly more than medium height. His hair was black and curly, and his eyes were deep blue, and he had a resonant voice in which he expressed firmly held opinions. Geryon did not like him. The knight's towering self-confidence, an egotism so pure that there was a kind of innocence about it, seemed to confirm the worst of Leldoran's dark pronouncements about Mimbrates. And Mandoralin's extravagant courtesy to Aunt Pole struck Geryon as beyond the bounds of proper civility. To make matters even worse, Aunt Pole seemed quite willing to accept the knight's flatteries at face value. As they rode through the continuing drizzle along the Great West Road, Geryon noted with some satisfaction that his companions appeared to share his opinion. Barak's expression spoke louder than words. Silk's eyebrows lifted sardonically at each of the knight's pronouncements, and Dernick scowled. Geryon, however, had little time to sort out his feelings about the Mimbrate. He rode close beside the litter upon which Leldoran tossed painfully as the Algroth poison seared in his wounds. He offered his friend what comfort he could, and exchanged frequent, worried looks with Aunt Pole, who rode nearby. During the worst of Leldoran's paroxysms, I hope I got that. Geryon helplessly held the young man's hand, unable to think of anything else to do to ease his pain. Sharkies feel like that's the first real ill will from Dernick. Yeah, everything else has been pretty practical, even when he's fighting. Like, you know, when he hit Brill way back at Faldor's farm, you know, he's just practical about it. He wasn't, like, angry. Or, like, yeah. Bear thine infirmity with fortitude, good youth, Mandoralin cheerfully advised the injured Asturian, after a particularly bad bout that left Leldoran gasping and moaning. This discomfort of thine is but an illusion. Thy mind can put it to rest, if thou wouldst have it so. Good vibes only, everyone. Yep. That's exactly the kind of comfort I'd expect from a Mimbrate, Leldoran retorted from between clenched teeth. I think I'd rather you didn't ride so close. Your opinions smell almost as bad as your armor. Mandaralen's face flushed slightly. The venom which doth rage through the body of our injured friend hath, it would seem, bereft him of civility as well as sense, he observed coldly. Laldoran half raised himself in the litter as if to respond hotly, but the sudden movement seemed to aggravate his injury, and he lapsed into unconsciousness. His wounds are grave, Mandaralen stated. Thy poultice, Lady Polgara, may not suffice to save his life. He needs rest, she told him. Try not to agitate him so much. I will place myself beyond the reach of his eye, Mandaralen replied. Through no fault of mine own, my visage is hateful to him, and doth stir him to unhealthful choler. He moved his war-horse ahead at a canter until he was some distance in front of the rest of them. Mandoralen. Do they all talk like that? Garion asked with a certain rancor. These and thous and doths? Mimbrates tend to be very formal, Aunt Pole explained. You'll get used to it. I think it sounds stupid, Garion muttered darkly, glaring after the knight. An example of good manners won't hurt you all that much, Garion. They rode on through the dripping forest as evening settled among the trees. Aunt Pole? Garion asked finally. Yes, dear? What was that Grolim talking about when he said that about you and Torak? It's something Torak said once when he was raving. The Grolims took it seriously, that's all. She pulled her blue cloak tighter about her. Doesn't it worry you? Not particularly. What was that prophecy the Grolim was talking about? I didn't understand any of that. The word prophecy, for some reason, stirred something very deep in him. I tried to give it the teenage angst sound. Teen angst. That's stupid. The Mrin Codex, she answered. It's a very old version, and the writing's almost illegible. It mentions companions, the bear, the rat, and the man who will live twice. It's the only version that says anything about them. Nobody knows for certain that it really means anything. Grandfather thinks it does, doesn't he? Your grandfather has a number of curious notions. Old things impress him, probably because he's so old himself. Garion was going to ask her about this prophecy that seemed to exist in more than one version, but Laldoran moaned then, and they both immediately turned to him. They arrived shortly thereafter at a Tolnedran hostel with thick, whitewashed walls and a red tile roof. Aunt Pole saw to it that Laldoran was placed in a warm room, and she spent the night sitting by his bed caring for him. Garion padded worriedly down the dark hallway in his stockinged feet a half-dozen times before morning to check on his friend, but there seemed to be no change. By daybreak, the rain had let up. They started out in the grayish dawn, with Mandoralen still riding some distance ahead, until they reached, at last, the edge of the dark forest, and saw before them the vast, open expanse of the Erendish central plain, dun-colored and sere in the last few weeks of winter. Seer? It's S-E-R-E. I don't think I've ever heard it out loud for certain, but I've always kind of read it as seer in my head. The knight stopped there and waited for them to join him, his face somber. "What's the trouble?" Silk asked him. Manderalin pointed gravely at a column of black smoke rising from a few miles out on the plain. "What is it?" Silk inquired, his rat face puzzled. "Smoke in Arendia can mean but one thing," the knight replied, pulling on his plumed helmet. "Abide here, dear friends. I will investigate, but I fear the worst." Merriam-Webster agrees, seer. He set his spurs to the flanks of his charger and leaped forward at a thunderous gallop. "Wait!" Barak roared after him, but Manderalin rode on obliviously. "That idiot!" the big Cherok fumed. "I'd better go with him in case there's trouble." "It isn't necessary," Leldorin advised weakly from his litter. "Not even an army would dare to interfere with him." "I thought you didn't like him," Barak said, a little surprised. "I don't," Leldorin admitted, "but he's the most feared man in Arendia. Even in Asturia we've heard of Sir Manderalin. No sane man would stand in his way." They drew back into the shelter of the forest and waited for the knight to come back. When he returned, his face was angry. "It is as I feared," he announced. "A war doth rage in our path. A senseless war, since the two barons involved are kinsmen and the best of friends." "Can we go around it?" Silk asked. "Nay, Prince Keldar," Manderalin replied. "Their conflict is so widespread that we would be waylaid ere we had gone 3 leagues. I must, it would appear, buy us passage." "Do you think they'll take money to let us pass?" Dernick asked dubiously. "In Arendia there is another way to make such purchase, goodman," Manderalin responded. "May I prevail upon thee to obtain 6 or 8 stout poles, perhaps 20 feet in length and about as thick as my wrist at the butt?" "Of course." Dernick took up his axe. "What have you got in mind?" Barak rumbled. "I will challenge them," Manderalin announced calmly. "One or all. No true knight could refuse me without being called craven. Wilt thou be my second and deliver my challenge, my lord?" "What if you lose?" Silk suggested. Sharky say, "Mando is involved in a classic bear hunt. We can't go over it, we can't go under it, we'll have to go through it. Can't go around it." "What if you lose?" Silk suggested. "Lose?" Manderalin seemed shocked. "I? Lose?" "Let it pass," Silk said. By the time Dernick had returned with the poles, Manderalin had finished tightening various straps beneath his armor. Taking one of the poles, he vaulted into his saddle and started at a rolling trot toward the column of smoke, with Barak at his side. "Is this really necessary, father?" Aunt Pole asked. "We have to get through, Pole," Mr. Wolf replied. "Don't worry. Manderalin knows what he's doing." After a couple of miles, they reached the top of a hill and looked down at the battle below. Too grim, black castles faced each other across a broad valley, and several villages dotted the plain on either side of the road. The nearest village was in flames, with a great pillar of greasy smoke rising from it to the lead-gray sky overhead, and serfs, armed with scythes and pitchforks, were attacking each other with a sort of mindless ferocity on the road itself. Something about this description reminds me of, it just sounds like a video game map. Like something that you would have in Warcraft or something. You know, you've got castle, villages in the middle, war coming down into the center. Like, you know, objectives and things. Maybe a flag. Parma says, yeah, mindless NPC troops. Some distance off, pikemen were gathering for a charge, and the air was thick with arrows. On two opposing hills, parties of armored knights with bright-colored pennons on their lances watched the battle. Great siege engines lofted boulders into the air to crash down on the struggling men, killing, so far as Geryon could tell, friend and foe indiscriminately. The valley was littered with the dead and the dying.
Stupid,
Wolf muttered darkly. I don't know if Wolf qualifies for teen angst. I think this is just regular old, folly of man angst. No one I know has ever accused Eddings of brilliance, Silk observed. Mandaralin set his horn to his lips and blew a shattering blast. The battle paused as the soldiers and serfs all stopped to stare up at him. That's got to be some horn. Apparently Mandaralin's got a horn blast so impressive that he can stop a war in its tracks. He sounded his horn again, and then again, each brassy note a challenge in itself. As the two opposing bodies of knights galloped through the knee-high, winter-yellowed grass to investigate, Mandaralin turned to Barak. "If it please thee, my lord," he requested politely, "deliver my challenge as soon as they approach us." Barak shrugged.
"It's your skin,"
he noted. He eyed the advancing knights. Barak's gotten sassy all of a sudden, huh? He eyed the advancing knights, and then lifted his voice in a great roar.
"Sir Mandaralin, Baron of Vaux-Mandor, desires entertainment," he declaimed. "It would amuse him if each of your parties would select a champion to joust with him. If, however, you are all such cowardly dogs that you have no stomach for such a contest, cease this brawling and stand aside so that your betters may pass."
"Splendidly spoken, my lord Barak," Mandaralin said with admiration.
"I've always had a way with words,"
Barak replied modestly. Oh, that's awesome. I love that bit. "Hey, dummies, wanna fight?" That's right, Sharkies. "Or are you chicken?" "Nobody calls me chicken." The two parties of knights warily rode closer. Farmos doing some Whose Line quoting. Words that will always start a fight. Want to fight?
For shame, my lords, Manderallen chided them. Ye will gain no honor in this sorry war. Sir Derrigan, what hath caused this contention? An insult, Sir Manderallen, the noble replied. He was a large man, and his polished steel helmet had a golden circlet riveted above the visor. An insult so vile that it may not go unpunished. It was I who was insulted, a noble on the other side contended hotly. What was the nature of this insult, Sir Olatrain? Manderallen inquired. Both men looked away uneasily, and neither spoke. Ye have gone to war over an insult which cannot even be recalled? Manderallen said incredulously. I had thought, my lords, that ye were serious men, but now I perceive my error. Don't the nobles of Erendia have anything better to do? Barak asked in a voice heavy with contempt. Of Sir Manderallen the Bastard we have all heard, a swarthy knight in black enameled armor sneered. But who is this red-bearded ape who so maligns his betters? You're going to take that? Barak asked Manderallen. It's more or less true, Manderallen admitted with a pained look. Since there was some temporary irregularity about my birth, which still raises questions about my legitimacy. This knight is Sir Haldoran, my third cousin, twice removed. Since it's considered unseemly in Erendia to spill the blood of kinsmen, he thus cheaply gains reputation for boldness by casting the matter in my teeth. Stupid custom, Barak grunted. In Cherek, kinsmen kill each other with more enthusiasm than they kill strangers. Alas, Manderallen sighed, this is not Cherek. Would you be offended if I dealt with this? Barak asked politely. Not at all. Barak moved closer to the swarthy knight. I am Barak, Earl of Trelheim, he announced in a loud voice, kinsman to King Anheg of Cherek, and I see that certain nobles in Erendia have even fewer manners than they have brains. The lords of Erendia are not impressed by the self-bestowed titles of the pigsty kingdoms of the north, Sir Haldoran retorted coldly. I find your words offensive, friend, Barak said ominously. And I find thy ape face and scraggly beard amusing, Sir Haldoran replied. Barak did not even bother to draw his sword. He swung his huge arm in a wide circle and crashed his fist with stunning force against the side of the swarthy knight's helmet. Sir Haldoran's eyes glazed as he was swept from his saddle, and he made a vast clatter when he struck the ground. Would anyone else like to comment about my beard? Barak demanded. And that's the last we'll ever hear from Sir Haldoran, as he has been punched out of the story. Gently, my lord, Manderallen advised. He glanced down with a certain satisfaction at the unconscious form of his senseless kinsman, twitching in the tall grass. Will we docilely accept this attack on our brave companion? One of the knights in Baron Derrigan's party demanded in a harshly accented voice. I think I need to rewind that. Yes, Pharma saying, would it be acceptable to you if I gave your second cousin a whooping?
Hang on. Third cousin, twice removed. Ahem.
Will we docilely accept this attack on our brave companion?
One of the knights in Baron Darrigan's party demanded in a harshly accented voice.
Kill them all!
He reached for his sword. In the instant thy sword leaves its sheath, thou art a dead man, Sir Knight, Manderalin coolly advised him. The knight's hand froze on his sword hilt. Yeah, Baron Darrigan. I knew when I said it that time that it was going to get commented on. Baron Darrigan, Sharky's said in a Groucho Marx voice. If he's been removed before, we can do it again. To be fair, I do not remember what Groucho... I've got like a vague idea in my head of what Groucho Marx sounds like. I should be doing something like this, right? But I'm not going to be able to do an impersonation because I don't remember well enough. For shame, my lords, Manderalin continued accusingly. Surely ye know that by courtesy and common usage, my challenge, until it is answered, guarantees my safety and that of my companions. Choose your champions or withdraw. I tire of all this, and presently will become irritable. It's the two parties of knights pulled back some distance to confer, and several men-at-arms came to the hilltop to pick up Sir Haldoran. That one who was going to draw his sword was a Murgo, Garion said quietly. I noticed that, Hetar murmured, his dark eyes glittering. They're coming back, Dernick warned. I will joust with thee, Sir Manderalin, Baron Darrigan announced as he approached. I do not doubt that thy reputation is well deserved, but I also have taken the prize in no small number of tourneys. I would be honored to try a lance with thee. And I too will try my skill against thine, Sir Knight, Baron Olotrain declared. My arm is also feared in some parts of Erendia. I think I might have swapped their voices there, but whatever. Very well, Manderalin replied. Let us seek level ground and proceed. The day wears on, and my companions and I have business to the south. They all rode down the hill to the field below, where the two groups of knights drew up on either side of a course which had been quickly trampled out in the high yellow grass. Darrigan galloped to the far end, turned, and sat waiting, his blunted lance resting in his stirrup. Thy courage becomes thee, my lord, Manderalin called, taking up one of the poles Dernick had cut. I shall try not to injure thee too greatly. Art thou prepared to meet my charge? I am, the Baron replied, lowering his visor. Manderalin clapped down his visor, lowered his lance, and set his spurs to his warhorse. It's probably inappropriate under the circumstances, Silk murmured, but I can't help wishing that our overbearing friend could suffer some humiliating defeat. Mr. Wolf gave him a withering look. Forget it. Is he that good? Silk asked wistfully. Watch, Wolf told him. The two knights met in the center of the course with a resounding crash, and their lances both shattered at the stunning impact, littering the trampled grass with splinters. They thundered past each other, turned, and rode back, each to his original starting place. Darrigan, Garion noticed, swayed somewhat in the saddle as he rode. The knights charged again, and their fresh lances also shattered. "I should have cut more poles," Dernick said thoughtfully. But Baron Darrigan swayed even more as he rode back this time, and on the third charge his faltering lance glanced off Mandaralen's shield. Mandaralen's lance, however, struck true, and the Baron was hurled from his saddle by the force of their meeting. Mandaralen reined in his charger and looked down at him. "Art thou able to continue, my lord?" he asked politely. Darrigan staggered to his feet.
"I do not yield,"
he gasped, drawing his sword. "Splendid," Mandaralen replied. "I feared that I might have done thee harm." He slid out of his saddle, drew his sword, and swung directly at Darrigan's head. The blow glanced off the Baron's hastily raised shield, and Mandaralen swung again without pause. Darrigan managed one or two feeble swings before Mandaralen's broadsword caught him full on the side of the helmet. He spun once and collapsed face down on the earth. "My lord?" Mandaralen inquired solicitously. He reached down, rolled over his fallen opponent, and opened the dented visor of the Baron's helmet. "Art thou unwell, my lord?" he asked. "Dost thou wish to continue?" Darrigan did not reply. Blood ran freely from his nose, and his eyes were rolled back in his head. His face was blue, and the right side of his body quivered spasmodically. Now there's a word. "Since this brave knight is unable to speak for himself," Mandaralen announced, "I declare him vanquished." He looked around, his broadsword still in his hand. "Would any here gainsay my words?" There was a vast silence. "Will some few then remove him from the field?" Mandaralen suggested. "His injuries do not appear grave. A few months in bed should make him whole again." He turned to Baron Olotrain, whose face had grown visibly pale. "Well, my lord," he said cheerfully, "shall we proceed? My companions and I are impatient to continue our journey." Sir Olotrain was thrown to the ground on the first charge, and broke his leg as he fell. "Ill luck, my lord," Mandaralen observed, approaching on foot with drawn sword. "Dost thou yield?" "I cannot stand," Olotrain said from between clenched teeth. "I have no choice but to yield." "And I and my companions may continue our journey?" "Ye may freely depart," the man on the ground replied painfully. Sharky's wondering whether he really got thrown out of the saddle, considering he broke his leg on the way down.
"Not just yet,"
a harsh voice interrupted. The armored Murgo pushed his horse through the crowd of other mounted knights until he was directly in front of Mandaralen. "I thought he might decide to interfere," Aunt Pole said quietly. She dismounted and stepped out onto the hoof-churned course. "Move out of the way, Mandaralen," she told the knight. I froze? Everything's moving on my end. Am I still frozen? Okay, you're back. I like that. This armored knight comes forward, and Aunt Pole's like out of the way, getting off her horse. She told the knight. Nay, my lady, Mandaralin protested. Wolf barked sharply.
Move, Mandaralin!
Mandaralin looked startled and stepped aside. Well, Grolim? Aunt Pole challenged, pushing back her hood. The mounted man's eyes widened as he saw the white lock in her hair, and then he raised his hand almost despairingly, muttering rapidly under his breath. Once again. Oh, froze up again, huh? I still have video on my side, because I've got like my streaming on one side and then I've just got it open in a window on the other side so I can see. Okay, back again. Strange. I wonder what's causing that. I don't think it's anything on my end. Because my video, like I've got a browser open and I've also got an indication of my upload here and it seems to be fine there. When it freezes up, is it just the video or is it video and audio that's freezing? I'm not frozen, I just was waiting. Oh, okay, so video and audio. Okay, I will go back slightly. Hopefully it continues working, but let me know if it freezes up again.
Not just yet,
a harsh voice interrupted. The armored Murgo pushed his horse through the crowd of other mounted knights until he was directly in front of Mandaralin. I thought he might decide to interfere, Aunt Pole said quietly. She dismounted and stepped out onto the hoof-churned course. Move out of the way, Mandaralin, she told the knight. Nay, my lady, Mandaralin protested. Wolf barked sharply.
Move, Mandaralin!
Mandaralin looked startled and stepped aside. Well, Grolim, Aunt Pole challenged, pushing back her hood. The mounted man's eyes widened as he saw the white lock in her hair, and then he raised his hand almost despairingly, muttering rapidly under his breath. Once again, Garion felt that strange surge, and the hollow roaring filled his mind. For an instant, Aunt Pole's figure seemed surrounded... I see. For an instant, Aunt Pole's figure seemed surrounded by a kind of greenish light. She waved her hand indifferently, and the light disappeared. You must be out of practice, she told him. Would you like to try again? The Grolim raised both hands this time, but got no further. Maneuvering his horse carefully behind the armored man, Dernick had closed on him. With both hands, he raised his axe and smashed it down directly on top of the Grolim's helmet. Dernick! Aunt Pole shouted. Get away! But the smith, his face set grimly, swung again, and the Grolim slid senselessly from his saddle with a crash. You fool! Aunt Pole raged. What do you think you're doing? He was attacking you, Mistress Pole, Dernick explained, his eyes still hot. Get down off that horse. He slid down. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? She demanded. He could have killed you. I will protect you, Mistress Pole, Dernick replied stubbornly. I'm not a warrior or a magician, but I won't let anybody try to hurt you. Her eyes widened in surprise for an instant, then narrowed, then softened. Garion, who had known her from childhood, recognized her rapid changes of emotion. Without warning, she suddenly embraced the startled Dernick. "You great, clumsy, dear fool," she said. "Never do that again. Never! You almost made my heart stop." Geryon looked away with a strange lump in his throat, and saw the brief, sly smile that flickered across Mr. Wolf's face. A peculiar change had come over the knights lining the sides of the course. Several of them were looking around with the amazed expressions of men who had just been roused from some terrible dream. Others seemed suddenly lost in thought. Sir Olatrain struggled to rise. "Nay, my lord," Manderalin told him, pressing him gently back down. "Thou wilt do thyself injury."
"What have we done?"
the Baron groaned, his face anguished. Mr. Wolf dismounted and knelt beside the injured man.
"It wasn't your fault," he informed the Baron. "Your war was the Murgo's doing. He twisted your minds and set you on each other."
"Sorcery?" Olatrain gasped, his face growing pale. Wolf nodded.
"He's not really a Murgo, but a Grolim priest."
"And the spell is now broken?" Wolf nodded again, glancing at the unconscious Grolim. "Chain the Murgo!" the Baron ordered the assembled knights. He looked back at Wolf. "We have ways of dealing with sorcerers," he said grimly. "We will use the occasion to celebrate the end of our unnatural war. This Grolim sorcerer hath cast his last enchantment."
"Good,"
Wolf replied, with a bleak smile. "Sir Manderalin," Baron Olatrain said, wincing as he shifted his broken leg, "in what way may we repay thee and thy companions for bringing us to our senses?" "That peace hath been restored is reward enough," Manderalin replied somewhat pompously, "for, as all the world knows, I am the most peace-loving man in the kingdom." He glanced once at Laldorin, lying nearby on the ground in his litter, and a thought seemed to occur to him. "I would, however, ask a boon of thee. We have in our company a brave Asturian youth of noble family who hath suffered grievous injury. We would leave him, if we might, in thy care." "His presence shall honor me, Sir Manderalin," Olatrain assented immediately. "The women of my household will care for him most tenderly." He spoke briefly to one of his retainers, and the man mounted and rode quickly toward one of the nearby castles. "You're not going to leave me behind?" Laldorin protested weakly. "I'll be able to ride in a day or so." He began to cough rackingly. "I think not," Manderalin disagreed with a cool expression. "The results of thy wounding have not yet run their natural course." "I won't stay with Mimbrates," Laldorin insisted. "I'd rather take my chances on the road." Young Laldorin," Manderalin replied bluntly, even harshly, "I know thy distaste for the men of Mimbre. Thy wound, however, will soon begin to abscess, and then suppurate, and raging fever and delirium will afflict thee, making thy presence a burden upon us. We have not the time to care for thee, and thy sore need would delay us in our quest." Geryon gasped at the brutal directness of the knight's words. He glared at Manderalin with something very close to hatred. Laldorin's face, meanwhile, had gone white.
Thank you for pointing that out to me, Sir Manderalin, he said stiffly. I should have considered it myself. If you'll help me to my horse, I'll leave immediately. Again, another typo here. It says, you'll leave me. You'll help me to my horse. You'll stay right where you are, Aunt Pole told him flatly. Baron Olotrain's retainer returned with a group of household servants and a blonde girl of about 17 wearing a rose-colored gown of stiff brocade and a velvet cloak of teal. My younger sister, Lady Ariana, Olotrain introduced her. She's a spirited girl, and though she is young, she is already well versed in the care of the sick. I won't trouble her for long, my lord, Leldoran declared. I'll be returning to Asturia within a week. Lady Ariana laid a professional hand to his forehead. Nay, good youth, she disagreed. Thy visit, I think, will be protracted. I'll leave within the week, Leldoran repeated stubbornly. She shrugged. As it please thee. I expect that my brother will be able to spare some few servants to follow after thee, to provide thee that decent burial, which, if I misjudge not, thou wilt require before thou hast gone 10 leagues. Leldoran blinked. Aunt Pole took Lady Ariana to one side and spoke with her at some length, giving her a small packet of herbs and certain instructions. Leldoran motioned to Geryon, and Geryon went to him immediately and knelt beside the litter. So it ends, the young man murmured. I wish I could go on with you. You'll be well in no time at all, Geryon assured him, knowing that it wasn't true. Maybe you can catch up with us later. Leldoran shook his head. No, he disagreed. I'm afraid not. He began to cough again, the spasms seeming to tear at his lungs. We don't have much time, my friend, he gasped weakly, so listen carefully. Geryon, near tears, took his friend's hand. You remember what we were talking about that morning after we left my uncle's house? Geryon nodded. You said that I was the one who'd have to decide if we were to break our pledge to Torreson and the others to keep silent. I remember, Geryon told him. All right, Leldoran said. I've decided. I release you from your pledge. Do what you have to do. It would be better if you told my grandfather about it yourself, Leldoran, Geryon protested. I can't, Geryon, Leldoran groaned. The words would stick in my throat. I'm sorry, but it's the way I am. I know that Natchak's only using us, but I gave the others my word. I'm an errand, Geryon. I'll keep my word even though I know it's wrong, so it's up to you. You're going to have to keep Natchak from destroying my country. I want you to go straight to the king himself. To the king? He'd never believe me. Make him believe you. Tell him everything. Geryon shook his head firmly. I won't tell him your name, he declared, or Torreson's. You know what he'd do to you if I did. We don't matter, Leldoran insisted, coughing again. I'll tell him about Natchak, Geryon said stubbornly, but not about you. Where do I tell him to find the Murgo? He'll know, Leldoran replied, his voice very weak now. Natchak's the ambassador to the court at Vomimbre. He's the personal representative of Tor Urgs, king of the Murgos. I think I have misread Tor Urg's name before. I think I always read it as Urgas. I think I put an A in there,
unless it's another typo or something. He's the personal representative of Tor Urgs, king of the Murgos. Garion was stunned at the implications of that. He's got all the gold from the bottomless mines of Thol Murgos at his command, Leldorin continued. The plot he gave my friends and me could be just one of a dozen or more, all aimed at destroying Erendia. You've got to stop him, Garion. Promise me. The pale young man's eyes were feverish, and his grip on Garion's hand tightened. I'll stop him, Leldorin. I don't know how yet, but one way or another I'll stop him. Leldorin sank weakly back on the litter, his strength seeming to run out as if the necessity for extracting that promise had been the only thing sustaining him. Goodbye, Leldorin, Garion said softly, his eyes filling with tears. Goodbye, my friend, Leldorin barely more than whispered, and then his eyes closed, and the hand gripping Garion's went limp. Garion stared at him with a dreadful fear until he saw the faint flutter of his pulse in the hollow of his throat. Leldorin was still alive, if only barely. Garion tenderly put down his friend's hand and pulled the rough gray blanket up around his shoulders. Then he stood up and walked quickly away with tears running down his cheeks. The rest of the farewells were brief, and they remounted and rode at a trot toward the Great West Road. There were a few cheers from the serfs and pikemen as they passed, but in the distance there was another sound. The women from the villages had come out to search for their men among the bodies littering the field, and their wails and shrieks mocked the cheers. With deliberate purpose, Garion pushed his horse forward until he drew in beside Mandaralin. I have something to say to you, he said hotly, and you aren't going to like it, but I don't really care. Oh? The knight replied mildly. I think the way you talked to Leldorin back there was cruel and disgusting, Garion told him. You might think you're the greatest knight in the world, but I think you're a loud-mouthed braggart with no more compassion than a block of stone, and if you don't like it, what do you plan to do about it? Ah, Mandaralin said, that. I think that thou hast misunderstood, my young friend. It was necessary in order to save his life. The Asturian youth is very brave, and so gives no thought to himself. Had I not spoken so to him, he would surely have insisted upon continuing with us, and would soon have died. Died? Garion scoffed. Aunt Pol could have cured him. It was the Lady Polgara herself who informed me that his life was in danger, Mandaralin replied. His honor would not permit him to seek proper care, but that same honor prevailed upon him to remain behind lest he delay us. The knight smiled wryly. He will, I think, be no fonder of me for my words than thou art, but he will be alive, and that's what matters, is it not? Garion stared at the arrogant-seeming Mimbrate, his anger suddenly robbed of its target. With painful clarity, he realized that he had just made a fool of himself. I'm sorry, he apologized grudgingly. I didn't realize what you were doing. Mandaralin shrugged. It's not important. I'm frequently misunderstood. As long as I know that my motives are good, however, I'm seldom very concerned with the opinions of others. I'm glad, though, that I had the opportunity to explain this to thee. Thou art to be my companion, and it ill behooves companions to have misapprehensions about each other. They rode on in silence, as Garion struggled to readjust his thinking. There was, it seemed, much more to Manderallen than he had suspected. They reached the highway then, and turned south again under a threatening sky. And that's chapter 8 on page 90. That's the end of chapter 7. And it's nearly 9 o'clock. Oh boy. So, there was a lot in that chapter, which explains why it was a little longer. They sorted out a whole war. I mean, not necessarily a huge war, but 2 warring lords. And we had Aunt Pole very willing to step forward and challenge an armored Murgo. The Sharkies say, "A paladin has joined your party." Well, he doesn't have holy magic, so I think he's just a knight. Farmouse liked that bit. I think it's important to know that Manderallen actually had a lot of respect for Laldoran. Yeah. The writing makes you not want to like Manderallen at first. It's intentional, clearly. Nobody likes Manderallen at first except for Aunt Pole, and that makes everyone else like him even less. But as with other characters, there's development as it goes on. We've learned a little bit more about Manderallen. Farmos is like, he's being a jerk to him, but he's really just trying to steal his courage. Well, it's almost like he's trying to insult him into doing the thing that will save his life, right? He's basically saying, like, yes, you're very brave, but you're gonna hold us back. Like, you are a weakness to us now. And he's doing that in order to hurt Laldoran's feelings so that he'll stay put and not die. Oh, I see. He was talking to him as he was injured, as the way he would talk to a fellow knight. Yeah, I don't know. That was a little bit of. I think that's just how Manderallen sees things, He is the greatest knight in all the land, and therefore feels no pain because he wills to not feel any pain. The Sharkies were saying no one likes Manderallen except for Aunt Pole and Manderallen. I see. I was wondering about that. Except for Manderallen, yes. Aunt Pole likes Manderallen, and Manderallen likes Manderallen. And to an extent, maybe Mr. Wolf. Mr. Wolf, at the very least, respects Manderallen. Mr. Wolf watched Manderallen walk up and challenge 2 entire armies, and was like, he's got this. Yes. And the whole bit with Dernick and Aunt Pole. Like, clearly, Aunt Pole had that under control and was really not at risk at all. But Dernick saw, Magic Man casting scary spells at Aunt Pole and was like, no, that is not happening. Gets behind them and just, down you go. Like, this is not okay. You do not do that. I wonder whether Dernick would have responded in precisely the same way if anybody else had been the target. And apparently Mr. Wolf was noticing something going on there. Oh boy. And we met Chamdar and learned that Nachak is the official emissary of the king of the Murgos, and yet is still trying to, destroy. Yeah, oh boy, what a mess. So yeah, there's, honestly, between those 2 chapters, there's quite a lot that happened. A few developments. Farmo says he is definitely like, I need to protect Pole, even if she doesn't need me to protect her. I think it's like if there is a chance that she might come to harm, then he's got to protect her. It doesn't matter whether, like 99% chance that she's got this. There's that 1% chance that she might not got this, and he's not taking that risk. So Leldorin has left the party. He did not last for very long, unfortunately. Although, I mean, people didn't necessarily like him at first. I'm wondering, is that the case now that he's gone through some character development and we've learned more about Leldorin? What are people's opinions of him at this point? Because I know when he was first introduced, the Sharkies were saying, are we supposed to like this guy? Which, again, I don't think you necessarily were supposed to at first. Farmo says he's endearing at least now. Yeah, he was starting to get some things sorted out. Some of the stuff that was initially like, Leldorin, come on, man. I think he's starting to. Mrs. Sharky warmed slightly, but don't think I'd want to hang out with him. You wouldn't know until you tried, right? He's one of those people, I think, that's just supposed to be like, you don't think you'd get along with him, but then his personality is just so charming. Maybe. Or maybe we just wouldn't like him. Farmo says he's still infuriating, but in a more likable way. Yeah. I'll lead the serfs in a rebellion. I will be a serf myself. I will live among them and share their woes. Leldorin, it's not going to do anybody any good. Oh, boy. Farmo says, I've known people like him and been friends with them. They're great for short periods of time. Farmo says, not great at being the voice of reason for them. Mr. Sharky would rather hang out with Leldorin and Garion than just Garion when Leldorin goes home. Oh, then just Garion when Leldorin goes home. I gotcha. I don't know if I would have very much in common with Garion. I don't know what we would talk about. Farmer says Garion as a buffer friend would work. Garion to keep Leldorin under control. Well, this has been a 2-hour stream, and I still need to eat something and then go get some sleep because I'm quite tired. So, I think it's time to call it there. But this was fun. Powered through 2 longer chapters and quite a lot of content there, so I'm glad we got through that. And yeah. The next chapter starts off with a little conversation with Hetar, so look forward to that. All right. Well, have a lovely weekend, everybody. Hopefully relax a little bit. We're going to be heading out towards Chilliwack to visit some friends. Good long weekend. And yeah, we'll see you next Wednesday. Happy early family day. All right. Have a good night. Bye.